Well, good morning, everyone. I'm back to talk about Tokyo Gore Police this morning. And I hate to start with a preamble, but there's a couple of things that I think that I should probably note before I go any further. Number one, I definitely need to stop wearing all blue or a lot of blue when I'm working on a blue background. It just makes me disappear. It's stupid. I know. I gotta cut this shit out. I apologize. Secondly, the story of how I came to watch this movie is sort of worth noting, at least, hey, it's worth noting in my opinion. Yeah, my channel, my rules, deal with it. I was searching for a giallo. I was just in the mood. I found Gore in Venice on Tubi, which has a bit of a reputation, and I ended up getting, I think, probably about three-quarters of the way through it before I realized that I was watching the censored version. And I mean censored to the point where the kill scenes are pretty much completely cut out and non-existent. So it was a little bit like I was watching a really sort of like low-grade Italian softcore movie or something, because all the dumb sex stuff they left in, of course. But I'm not here to bash that movie because, let's be honest, without seeing the uncut version, I don't think I could really give it any kind of fair evaluation. So when your gore goes missing, who could you possibly put on the case but the Tokyo Gore Police? Now, I had heard about this movie for years, but could never just seem to track it down to be able to watch it. But God bless Tubi, they've got it, and they've also got Terrifier 2 on a side note, which is so awesome on their part. I love you even more now, Tubi, thank you. So finally got to watch this sucker, and does it live up to its name and reputation? Well, yes and no. I mean, don't get me wrong, this movie is an exploding smorgasbord of over-the-top gore and blood and violence and all sorts of weird, wacky perversity, but it's basically a live-action cartoon. I'm not saying it's not excessive. Excess is this movie's whole reason for being, but it's just done in such a cartoonish way that I don't think that anyone, whether they like this movie, whether it's their kind of movie or not, I would be amazed if anyone was actually seriously offended by any of the violence in this movie, because it's all so playful that there's not a moment of it that you can really take seriously. Like the sheer excess of a movie like Peter Jackson's Dead Alive, coupled with the cartoonish tone and execution of an anime, sprinkled with the zero shits attitude as far as offending people that you would associate with other movies released under the Tokyo Shock banner, like Takashi Miike's Ichi the Killer as an example. And just like Ichi the Killer and a lot of other Asian splatter cinema, Tokyo Gore Police was clearly not filmed with the most high-end digital video technology available, even for a 2008 movie. But what it lacks in terms of value there, it makes up for with just sheer zeal and honestly a very sort of smart, calculated way of using that lower grade video quality to its advantage. It gives everything this grainy quality that makes the scenes feel that much more scuzzy and dank. Like, this is one of those movies where by the time it's done, you feel like you need a very long shower and a steam bath. While the practical effects are not the most convincing thing that you have ever seen, certainly not, they're executed in a very consistent way, so that from one scene to the next, it always feels like a very defined and deliberate kind of aesthetic. As manic as this movie is, stylistically, it doesn't feel like they're just throwing things at a wall blindly and seeing what's gonna stick. That's the sensation that it creates while you're watching it. The whole movie feels like it's just winging it in the best possible sense of the term. But everything that's being done here is being done with its own sense of care and calculation. It's a very good example of how you shouldn't let things like a low budget be a barrier in terms of making your movie look great and making it look distinct. Because director Yoshihiro Nishimura is not simply doing the best that he can with more modest production values. He's actually embracing the modesty of those production values and using it to empower the movie and give it its own unique look and voice. I mean, sure, there's oodles of Hollywood action movies and thrillers with a big scale spectacle that is much better produced on a technical level, but honestly now, how many of those stand out from the pack at this point? How many of them have you seen over the years that you can actually remember or that you care to revisit? Not only does this movie look great, it looks unique. It feels nothing like something that you could get over here in North America. I'm repeating myself like a broken goddamn record, but let this be a lesson to all you budding filmmakers out there. Even if all you can afford is a couple of super soakers, some water, and red food coloring, that is enough to turn your movie into something special. This is proof of that. I mean, really, Nishimura throws everything in here, from still photos to two-dimensional clip art, and all of those things have been nothing but an embarrassment and a headache in other low-budget thrillers that I've watched in the past. But somehow here, it all feels a part of the piece. While I prefer to just keep Birdemic and its sequels in the past where it belongs, I'm going to bring it up again and say that this is just further proof that just because you're working with limited means or primitive technology doesn't mean you can't make something that feels like a real movie. Okay? Are you, again, you listening there, James Nagoyan? Because this guy was working with some of the same primitive technology you were, and his movie is a complete and utter blast and just a joy to watch. I mean, it goes all the way back to the sort of stuff that you hear Robert Rodriguez saying about when he made El Mariachi. You embrace your limitations instead of trying to ignore them or hide them, and the most delightful things can happen. Anyway, end of sermon and back to the movie. If you're someone who in any form supports the notion of private policing, or if you embrace the rise in private policing that has taken place in North America, like I think I read somewhere that in the States now, private security guards and private police forces outnumber public officers by like almost 2-to-1 or something scary like that. But if you are someone who owns your own little militia, or you're shaking hands with someone who does, this is definitely not the movie for you. Because this movie centers around the idea that in this chaotic future Japan, there are mutants walking among society called engineers, and engineers were essentially spawned by a virus that a mad scientist created. And this virus means that when someone loses a limb or is injured, that injury morphs into some new appendage on their body, usually one that consists of muscle and a lot of teeth. There is not a single body part or appendage or organ in the human body that exists in this movie that is not at some point subject to either mutilation or transformation, or both, not always in that order. But to deal with this threat, the police come up with a new elite force called engineer hunters, who are essentially authorized to use sadism, brutality, intimidation, ultraviolence. Basically, they're kind of like, you know, a bunch of CIA black bag mercenaries that just got turned into police officers at the last minute. And at a certain point in the movie, when there's been a bit of an infection or an outbreak with the virus, and the police force suddenly becomes concerned and even paranoid that these engineers could be lurking everywhere, a bunch of these guys basically give themselves carte blanche as engineer hunters to go on a killing spree and taking out anyone that they even suspect might be an engineer with like zero proof. They just like execute them on sight. There is an extended montage involving one guy driving his car with long blades coming out of either end, like a big lawnmower or something like that, just cutting people in half like there's no tomorrow. And another cop is posing with the corpses and laughing maniacally. One guy's just running over people, but it's just goosh after goosh after big swelling splashy goosh of red food coloring water just leaping everywhere on this guy's windshield. You eventually find out that Ruka's father had actually been assassinated by the police force because he was against them being privatized. Like that, as they peel back the layers of the day that Ruka's father was assassinated, there's kind of a funny touch where you find out that at the same time that her father's assassin had a gun to his head, someone else had a gun to the assassin's head. You know, then furthermore made into a fall guy himself when he got popped by Triggerman number 2. That is a very classic and very welcome form of Japanese melodrama. And it's the sort of thing that only Asian cinema knows how to pull off to great effect in a movie like this. I mean, Asian cinema has never been shy about going for the full-on melodrama, although I think that they make a smart choice by letting the drama just sort of like sit at sort of a medium temperature once everything is revealed. I guess what I'm saying is that they don't play it up in a particularly melodramatic way when you get to the revelations. Probably because so much of what's transpiring is already operating with the amp cranked all the way to 11. So I don't think you need to dial up anything else, even in terms of the performances, for this movie to sustain itself. To sort of paraphrase the dearly departed Robin Williams, watching movies like this for the plot is a little bit like watching porno for the acting. But that said, when a filmmaker is at least willing to take the plot seriously, and I don't mean he has to make it labyrinth or like highly cerebral, but just to make it something that feels like a coherent story that adds up, you know, that's a nice bonus. And again, it doesn't take that much thought. They lay things out very clearly in this movie, and when it's all said and done, once your brain's kind of calmed down from the frenzy and you think back on the story, it actually makes a lot of sense. A surprising amount of sense, considering that the movie never really takes the time to slow down for it. I mean, it's a very simple story, to be fair, but again, just because you're telling a simple story isn't an excuse to half-ass the story or to neglect the storytelling. It's just enough to hold everything together simply and firmly. I mean, think about it. All a clothesline has to do is hold up your clothes. But if even one end of that falls, then that's like, you know, mission failed. So you might as well take the little bit of time to make sure that everything is actually going to hold up. This has one of my favorite end fight scenes that I've seen in a while. The fight between Ruka, the commissioner, with Ruka being backed up by the quadruple amputee gimp with the 4 blades for legs. That is how you do this right. Like, it is perfect. It is honestly perfect. As our protagonist Ruka, Ehishina does not leave quite the same mark here that she did in Takashi Miike's audition. But then again, how could she? But she's nevertheless right at home wading into these nutty waters. Some people might call her performance one note, but I think it's in very keeping with the very cartoonish way that everyone is sketched out here. How many anime characters do you honestly see emote that much when it all comes down to it? Let's face it, if you had seen your father's head blow apart right in front of you like she did, you know, you'd probably have some of the humanity and warmth drained out of you too. If you watch her performance closely, you do see that there is a bit of a sense of self-awareness and wit to it. The whole thing is just a very subtle sort of like elbow in the ribs at the kind of cliched protagonist that she's inhabiting here. Plus, the police commissioner essentially admits that he was grooming her to be the perfect engineer hunter. And I don't know if I would want someone who was hunting these freaks to be the kind of person who gets emotional too easily. So even with that backstory, you don't really get inside Ruka's head any more than most of the bullets and knives in this movie do. But again, this movie isn't striving to be a character study. This movie, like the best movies in the splatter genre, is nothing more than a glorious, excessive excuse for itself. And I will take a movie that is very frankly about nothing over a movie that has the pretense of being about something and doesn't follow through any day of the week. This is, in fact, a remake of an early 90s movie that Nishimura himself directed called Anatomia Extinction. So I don't know how hard it is to get your hands on a copy of that, but I think I'm probably going to seek it out and see how it compares. It's probably not quite as fleshed out, haha, as Tokyo Gore Police is, but I would be very curious to see the same story play out in an even more raw form. One last little random piece of trivia. Apparently this movie was shot and completed in just 2 weeks. So once again, like, budding filmmakers, Hollywood, are you guys taking notes from this man? You should be taking notes from this man. Anyway, in case you couldn't figure out by this point, I love this movie. It probably would have at least made an honorable mention, if not a top 10, had I watched it before me and the guys did our Best of the Naughties breakdown. But I'm still completely grateful to have gotten the chance to discover this movie and experience it in its uncut form, which did kind of restore some faith, because after that censored version of Gore in Venice, I was starting to have my doubts about Tubi for like half a second. But Tokyo Gore Police is still available to watch on Tubi in all its uncut gory glory. So please check this one out, or heck, if you've got some extra scratch, just go on Amazon or wherever you gotta go and buy it. Buy a copy. Just to be able to tell someone, like, you know what, watch this. Like, you're not gonna regret it. It is so much fun. And I think this might have kicked off a little bit of an Asian splatter cinema rabbit hole for me. It's been a little while since I waded through that kind of stuff, so I think I'm gonna look for some more movies like this. I like it. It's just right what I'm in the mood for at this point in time. I mean, draw your own conclusions there. But anyways, please do check this one out if you haven't seen it already. That's all I've got for now, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in again. Please keep watching the channel. I'm going to have more content coming soon. Hope you're all having a great morning, and I'll catch y'all later.